So today, I'm on holiday, which means that if any big news comes out and you're wondering why hasn't TMB responded to it, it's because I'm on holiday. But videos will still be coming out like this one is right now, right? So yeah, today we're going to do a tier list, but it's not going to be any tier list, right? This is going to be my kind of theoretical tier list for high level play. This is about what I think is important in this game, and at a theoretical level, where can these agents go? So with that in mind, let's dive into the list, and we'll start with Breach. And here's a great start, right? Because most of you are probably thinking Breach is fine, whatever, put him in B tier, move on. No, Breach is in D tier. The reason that Breach is in D tier, and this one has perplexed me slightly, you know, as I've done this for 3 seasons now, I've been keeping track of these stats, the win rates of agents, you know, on all of the maps for the past 3 seasons of VCT. And Breach has been the lowest win rate agent with a decent sample size in all 3 of those seasons. And that takes some, you know, thinking as to why that happens, because Breach still gets picked pretty often, but doesn't win very often. But Breach, I think, is down there. And I think probably one of the main reasons are there are better initiators available as well that you could just pick instead, and probably should be. But with that in mind, let's move on to Brimstone. And Brimstone is another agent that, personally, I don't think is that great. Right, I do think that Brim has some uses, but I'm really wanting to put Brim in the D tier. I think Brim will just about scrape into the C tier, but I really don't like that Brim only has 3 smokes that aren't rechargeable. I think that that's a massive, major weakness compared to some of the other controllers. And so let's move on to Cypher. Cypher is an interesting one. I do think that Cypher is good, right? What makes an agent good? Some of the things, information is, I think, a very, very important thing for agents to be good, and Cypher gives you information, right? And I think on the attack side for Sentinels as well, Cypher can do a bit of a better job as well than some of the other Sentinel counterparts, you know, like a Killjoy, for instance. I think Cypher is just a little bit better on the attack side in that kind of sense. So I do still think Cypher is pretty good. Maybe a bit overrated. One thing about Cypher, I think I'm going to put him in the A tier, but one thing about Cypher that I do want to explain is that I think that Cypher gets worse the more he gets picked. If you know what Cypher setup you're running into, it's very easy to destroy it. On certain maps, like I'm looking at some of these sunsets, and these Cypher setups just aren't finding any value because they're always getting destroyed. And so Cypher can end up being a pretty bad pick on some of these maps. But I think overall, kind of, you know, in a vacuum, in theory, Cypher is a pretty good agent. Let's move on to Jett. And Jett, I've long been a Jett hater, even when Jett was considered like super OP, mega OP, all of that. To me, a big reason why Jett was considered that is because so many people had mastered Jett but not mastered the other duelists. And I think really you're starting to see that now, right? Now that we've gotten to a point where other players have, certain players have mastered Raze, mastered Neon, they look better than Jett. Right, they clearly look better than Jett on, you know, quite a few of the maps. And I think that was probably always the case, but people just hadn't mastered those agents, so it didn't look that good, so they didn't play it. And playing Jett was probably the correct choice for them back then because they were better at Jett. But I think Jett overall is probably like a B tier agent. She's fine. Killjoy, again, information, good. Another thing that Killjoy has, maybe even a little better than Cypher, is stopping power. This is another thing that I think is very, very important in the game. By stopping power, I mean, you know, how good are you at stopping an opponent coming in onto your site, right? If you're defending a site, how good are you at stopping that? And Killjoy, pretty good at that, right? The reason that that's important is because if you go through most rounds of Valorant end in a site exec. At some point or another, they're going to end up in a site exec. So if they come to your site, how good are you stopping that? Because if you can stop them, then you're probably going to win the round, right? So Killjoy, I think is, you know, pretty good for that reason, but I don't think it's crazy good. I think I'm going to put Killjoy in the B tier. Omen's a very easy one. I'm going to put Omen in the S tier. This is probably no surprise given Omen's pick rate as well, but there's quite a few reasons why Omen is in the S tier. One, another thing that makes an agent pretty good in my opinion is being versatile. Omen is extremely versatile, right? There's a lot of different ways you can play Omen very passively, you can play Omen very aggressively, right? Or anywhere in between. And it all works for Omen. He has the best flash in the game. His smokes have the best kind of unique ability for the smokes in the game, right? Doing the one-ways on some maps is just crazy important to how the maps play out. And the teleport is good. Yeah, his ult isn't that great. Omen, S tier. You know, probably most of you will agree with that. Another one you'll probably agree with is Phoenix being in the D tier. Raze is an interesting one, though. Raze is one that I had to debate. The nade is good, right? Again, we talk about stopping power. In terms of stopping power on duelists, I think Raze has the best stopping power, you know, of the movement duelists, which I think is pretty good. Raze also gives you information, which I also think is pretty good. So I debated whether to put Raze in the S or A tier. I think I'm just about going to put Raze at the top of A instead of S, but it's kind of like it could go either way, I think. You know, Raze is right on that border. Reyna, D tier, easy. Put Reyna near the bottom. Sage as well, don't think is very good. We'll put Sage maybe above Phoenix, but in there, not too big of a problem. Skye, the non-rechargeable flashes. The dog is still good, the flashes are still good, but the other initiator options are kind of so good that I don't know about Skye. I think I'm going to put Skye in the C tier, probably above Brim, but still in the C tier. Sova, as I said before, information, very, very good, right? The one thing that Sova perhaps lacks is, you know, incredible stopping power, but you can still get some defensive darts that, you know, do stop people sometimes from entering in onto the site, which can be pretty good. I think that little change is just the fact that he doesn't have a ton of stock power is just going to keep him in the A tier for now, but still obviously very good. Viper, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you know what I think about Viper. Viper is absolutely S tier, up there with Omen. Do I still think that Viper is better than Omen? That's tough. That's tough. Maybe not now. Maybe not without the second snake bite. I'll put Viper just below. But Viper is still S tier in my opinion. I still think you should play it. Honestly, it still baffles me that Viper isn't like the meta on Haven. I still find this absolutely perplexing. The fact that Viper's win rate on Haven is so absurdly high. Basically every time anyone plays Viper on Haven, it pretty much always wins. But still, people don't like it for whatever reason. But on attack side, the Viper is so good. It's so good. It's so unbelievably good. Again, I talk about being versatile, right? Having a smoke that you can choose how long that smoke is up for as opposed to any other smoke in the game is crazy valuable. It's crazy valuable. The fact that it recharges and you get more smoke essentially than anyone else. The fact that it has multiple ways of using it with the orb or the wall. The fact that the wall covers, you know, most of the map. Like, it's just unbelievable. The fact that it decays people as they go through it. Like, there's so many. Viper's just very good. And the fact that Viper's pick rate kind of fell off to me is kind of crazy. And I don't really agree. Yoru. I do think that the theoretical ceiling of Yoru is incredibly high. The cost, though, of playing Yoru, I think is a high cost, right? If you were to play Yoru at like the highest possible level, you probably have to build a whole comp around Yoru, which is a sacrifice, right? And then you'd have to put a lot of time and effort into making that work. Now, if you did do that, I think you would stomp people. And we have seen Yoru find some success in this past season as well. But I think because the cost of Yoru is so high, essentially, of playing him, I think that does limit him somewhat to like a B tier agent. Astra, obviously with the buff, big change for Astra, and I think that, you know, Astra got a lot better because of that. Here's the thing I want to say, obviously my two S tier agents right now are both controllers, and here's a genuine truth that I think is about the game as well, that people underrate how good smokes are. Smokes are very, very strong. Just as an ability in general, smokes give you kind of the baseline value of a smoke is way higher than most abilities in the game, right? What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is if you throw a Raze nade, right, and you know it goes towards a certain area, but maybe you miss it slightly, right? So maybe it doesn't quite clear the corner that you wanted it to. Like, that's not finding that much value really then, is it? And that will happen quite often with something like a Raze nade. But with a smoke, you know, smokes will end up where you want them to be and will probably have some impact because they last so long, right? Like 15 seconds, that's a long time. And sometimes you will see in pro games, people will just sit there and wait outside of smoke and they will wait for it to go. Well, that's them waiting for 15 seconds. Imagine you had a molly that lasted 15 seconds that kept someone out. That would be OP. Then you add in the multiplicity of ways that you can use smokes as well. I think smokes are just very strong in the game, and I think the double controller really should be the direction that most teams look to. With that said, the rest of Astra's kit, the stun and the suck, I still think are a little difficult to get amazing value from. Obviously Astra sucking like the spike, you know, for a spike diffuse, yeah, that's gonna find you value, but other than that I still think they can be a little clunky. So I'm not gonna put Astra in S, but I am gonna put Astra in A tier. I think KO I think is an interesting case of an agent that gets better as the game goes on. The reason for that is because people get better at using their utility, and therefore suppressing people and not allowing them to use their utility is more impactful as we go through Valorant's cycle. And the rest of KO's kit is also pretty good, right? It's not like the KO's kit is bad. He also gives you information. I think I'm going to put KO in A tier, maybe even high A tier because of that. Chamber. less of a good option. Chamber's major weakness is that if you pick Chamber and you're on the attack side, you're just not doing that much. I've long held the belief that abilities that give you weapons aren't as impactful as people think. It's not that they're useless, but they aren't as important as people think because you probably have a gun in most rounds anyway. So Chamber I'm going to put, I think, in the... his defensive side is still good enough that I'll put him above... not above Sky. I'll put him in the C tier here alongside Brim and Sky. Neon obviously has kind of more recently taken over the game. I do still think that Neon... Again, it's kind of like the flip version of Yoru, right? A very similar trajectory, even as, you know, we've seen both of them have more pick rate this season. But whereas Yoru, I think, you know, requires that kind of big team effort to make work and make look amazing, Neon doesn't require as much sacrifice, right, to look amazing. And we've seen that this season, where if you just have a Neon player that's just really good at Neon, they can just take over a game. And so that makes it very impactful. Now, I still don't think Neon is S tier or anything, but I do think Neon is probably deserving of the A tier for that. Fade. Information is good. Again, similar to Sova, where the stopping power maybe isn't amazing, right? Like, could be better. Maybe could be make you S tier if you did have more stopping power. But that said, you know, still pretty good. Still probably A tier overall because information being revealed is really strong. Harbor. Again, I've talked about how smokes are really good and whatever, but unfortunately now with the Astra buff, there's really no reason to pick Harbor. But he is going to go in the D tier. Gecko. Refreshable utility is another thing that I think is very, very strong, right? Having refreshable utility, having more utility than your opponent is good. And we know the Gecko is getting a nerf, so we'll see exactly what that is. But right now, at least, Wingman, very strong in post plants to defuse as well. I think Gecko, theoretically for me, Gecko is probably S tier. His flash is good enough, his Wingman is good enough. The Mosh is pretty good, actually. The Mosh, in fact, is an ability that I think is better than most people give credit for, because again, when the mosh pit first came out, a lot of people thought like, oh, this takes a while to kind of go off, so people won't respect it and run through it. Well, most people don't run through it now, and they will stay there, which means essentially you have a molly that lasts quite a long time that will stop people, which is great as well. So yeah, Gecko, I'm going to put in the S tier. Deadlock has some uses. The Grevnet is fine, but the rest of the kit's pretty bad, so I'll put... I could make an argument for Deadlock being in D tier, but I'll put Deadlock at the bottom of the C tier because, you know, at least there is some combos there. ISO, interesting one. I just think ISO is a bit underrated. I'm going to put ISO in the B tier, I think. I think ISO is a decent option. I think ISO's problem is kind of similar to Yoru, to be honest, where you have to be willing to commit with it and the rest of the comp kind of needs to be able to still work. But when you do play ISO in that kind of comp, if you are willing to commit to that, I think ISO's pretty good. Clove. You probably all know what I think about Clove. Clove, again, smokes are good. That's great. But, you know, you might as well just play Omen, Astra, whatever. Because smokes are good, I'll put Clove here, but, you know, it is what it is. And then Vice. Vice, the last agent here. And obviously, we haven't seen a ton of Vice still. And I don't think I've seen a Vice yet that I've seen be, like, crazy strong. But I have seen little moments of Vice and little things, and I'm like, that's pretty good. So I think I'll end up putting Vice probably here in the B tier as well. And so that is my list. And again, this is kind of playing off some of the theoretical things that I think are important when, you know, you're evaluating how good an agent actually is. You know, there are some key fundamental principles that I think make an agent good or not. You know, one is refreshable utility, information, stopping power. Do you have these kind of things? And then the inverse flip of that as well, right? The denial of information, like smokes, right? The denial of stopping power, like, you know, Raze satchels or Jett dash, right? Like they deny stopping power. You know, those kind of things are good. And yeah, these are what I've ended up with because of that.